So for the first part of this message, I'll be interviewing Lynda, who wrote the book on parenting, tons of awesome stuff in it. And then I'm going to do a short sermon based on one of the chapters of her book. Lynda's a mom, a former pediatric nurse, a parenting instructor, and I read her book earlier this year and greatly benefited from it. So would you join me in welcoming Lynda Satre? Okay, here we go. How are you?
Okay.
Well,
A little nervous.
thank you so much for doing this third time this weekend.
Yeah.
And, one of the things, as I was thinking of this weekend, one of the things that stood out to me actually early on Saturday was, it was several months ago that you and Dave and Eric and I were sitting in your backyard with that big bonfire going on and the kids running around. And you started talking about this book, and the conversation became so fascinating for us that we actually moved from your backyard to your basement to get away from the kids.
We did.
And then we ended up talking for like 4 or 5 hours.
Yep.
It was like 10, 11 at night. And the kids kept coming and saying, we are so tired, and we kept saying, go out and play.
Yep.
And you were in the home stretch.
Yep.
And now here it is. The book is out. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for writing this book. So when I started reading your book, the first section of the book, you talk about your story and the ups and downs that you and Dave have had, traveling coast to coast while 30 weeks pregnant.
Yep.
There were just so many things you mentioned that just blew me away. So let's start with you sharing a little bit about your story.
Sure. Dave and I met in college in Iowa, so we started our marriage in Iowa. Well, I have to back up. A lot of people ask me if we planned on having 10 kids, and that never came up. We had never planned on having a big family. But we did have our first son in Iowa when Dave was in grad school, and then we headed out to Arizona, where my family is, to start his career. And we had our first 2 sons there, and then we went through a period of infertility. And it was a really hard time, and my heart goes out to all of you who struggle with infertility. I had surgery. I used infertility medications, and they're very, very challenging on you emotionally, those drugs. We went through adoption certification, and again, that's just heart-wrenching and much more difficult than I would have ever guessed. And the prospects of actually adopting a baby once you go through your certification was slim. Even 20 years ago, there weren't that many babies available. So we went ahead and did another round of infertility treatments. And I did conceive my twins through the grace of God, and was on bed rest for most of that pregnancy. So it wasn't easy. And then we had our 5th son. At that time, Dave got a different job up in the Seattle area, which required extensive traveling, and I had 5 little boys, 2 through 9, and Dave had a vasectomy, and he didn't want me to have any more kids after 35, and I was 34 plus a few months, so he had the vasectomy, and my heart broke, and I prayed that it didn't work, and it did, and I prayed, and it was not discussable for 2 years, and I prayed, and I prayed, and I prayed. And the funny part of this story is that we sat down, we'd been renovating this really ugly 1970s house and for years, and Dave goes, I was wondering what we should do now, and I said, I think we should have a baby. And he said, I was thinking on the lines of a vacation. But it was at that moment that he really let me speak my heart. And that led us to a reversal, even though we didn't tell anybody, because I was by then 36. And it took us 6 months to conceive our first baby, and I was overjoyed, and we let everybody know about our exciting reversal news, even though people were a little shocked. And then I quickly lost that baby. And that set me into another round of despair after all these years of praying, and then finally conceiving, and then to lose that baby. But God did bless us with my first daughter after that miscarriage. And when she was just an infant, I was amazingly pregnant again with a set of identical twins. And then it just became, are we going to trust God? And I knew that I couldn't handle that with Dave's travel schedule. He had a huge territory. He was gone every week. And with 8 kids and a set of twins, I just knew that I needed him at home at night. So he kept putting in at work for a job at corporate, which was in Delaware. We were living in Seattle at the time. And it came through a job, but I was 30 weeks along with this twin pregnancy. So the only way to get across the country was Amtrak train. That was what my doctor approved, which was a whole adventure. But unfortunately, 2 weeks after we arrived at my second OB appointment, the twins were in distress from twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome, and they were taken by emergency C-section. And so for the next month, with no support on the East Coast, the kids were in the NICU. And so I had 2 more kids in my 40s, my last at 44 and a half. It's been quite a journey of trusting. My oldest 2 children are married. One lives in Denver, he's in grad school. And my second oldest son is married in Florida with 3 kids. So that is a little bit about
Quite a journey.
Yeah.
Yes. So now you know why I said she's eminently qualified to write this book. So let's get into your book. You talk about this danger of comparing or comparison in your book a lot. So tell us a little bit about this. What is this danger and how can we avoid getting into that trap?
Yeah. Growing up in the 70s, we didn't have all these comparisons in our face. And today it is so hard because everybody's posting the best. And the bar is set so high. And when you see it from everybody, it feels like there's no way you can measure up, and you can't. And what I want you to know is that real life isn't as perfect as what you see on those images posted online. And having 10 children, it really is humble because you realize you really don't have it all that together and you aren't in that much power. And I have, I do have kids who walked really late and some who I couldn't keep off the stairs at 7 months. And I had kids who talked really early, and I had kids who went through speech therapy and talked really late. And I had kids who read really early and kids who read really late. And I really can't take credit for those who mastered things early, and I'm not going to take the blame for those kids who did things late. And each kid is special and has their own gifts and their own timelines, and it's okay. And I think, you know, when you see people online who say, oh, I potty trained my kid at 18 months in a day, and it really makes those of us who have a 4-year-old who isn't potty trained really feel terrible. And by the way, speaking of potty training, don't ask me about that because I stink at potty training. But I really think that some people are just lucky. You know, they get the kid who sleeps through the night when they're 4 weeks old, and they just got lucky. And so anyway, just stay away from social media.
Good advice.
Yeah.
Yes. Hey, I meant to mention this. You might want to take out the bulletin insert from your bulletins because in her book and some of the things she's going to say, there are these one sentences that are so powerful and has so much insight. You might want to write those down. We left the second page of the insert blank where you can write these things down, so take advantage of that. So Lynda, you know, you just touched on it, how every child is different. You know, some kids do things early on, some later on. And you develop this theme a little bit more in chapter 3 of your book, where you write about how, as parents, we should embrace the uniqueness of each and every child. How do you do that? How do you embrace the uniqueness of each and every child? How do you embrace the uniqueness of 10 kids?
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about that.
My favorite analogy or personality profiling is by Gary Smalley and John Trent, and they used animals to kind of identify personalities. And we need all personalities in our life, and to embrace the humor of an otter, or the leadership potential, or the potential future CEO of the lion, or the attention to detail of the beaver, or the peacemaking personality of the beaver or of the golden retriever. By looking at their potential and the gifts that that personality brings, it helps them feel like they are special and an important part of our family. There is not one bad personality. And we also need to understand our own personality and how that plays out in our parenting and how we're relating to our children. because some of us who are like fun-loving otters who love to paint with their kids, maybe doing housework isn't one of their top priorities, or really sticking to boundaries and following through with discipline. But somebody with a lion personality who leans towards more control, they need to pay more attention to how they're showing love to their family. So it is really important to understand that both with our kids and ourselves.
You just touched on this a little bit about how setting rules and boundaries is so important. You actually make a very clear distinction between what discipline is and what punishment is. You talk about this a lot in your book. And you talk about how one is beneficial, but the other one is actually harmful. So tell us the distinction between discipline and punishment, how to distinguish between the two, and why one is beneficial and one is harmful.
Yeah, I think discipline gets a bad rap. And when I talk about discipline, I talk about it in the true sense of the word. The root word of discipline is actually disciple, which means learner. And the word disciplina means instruction given, teaching, learning, and knowledge. With discipline, we're training for the future. It's done out of love, and it provides growth and maturity. Punishment is a penalty for something that they did. It's done out of anger. It causes fear and shame and resentment. You can have temporary obedience, but you can also have rebellion with punishment. And there's a continuum with punishment, and it can go towards abuse, which is unfair and degrading and cause emotional and physical scars. With discipline, it's fair, respectful, reasonable, and expected.
You actually use a phrase in that chapter. You talk about punishment often results from reacting to situation. Discipline is a response.
Yep.
Responding versus reacting.
Right.
And if we respond more, we would do this better.
Right.
Talking about responding, one place where we often stumble as parents is effective communication. You devote a whole chapter to this. So share with us some basics of how can we be effective in parent-child communication.
I believe that most conflict results in a communication problem rather than a situation problem. Blake did a great sermon talking about that we believe we're right 100%. Everybody believes they're right 100%. So when you come in a reactive situation, people become defensive and barriers break down. So getting that communication down will go a long, long ways. And I always teach that we communicate first before we dole out any, before we react any further, that we need to get the communication down first. I cover this in depth. It's such a huge topic to cover in a couple sentences, but it's covered in my free parenting seminar coming up on May 5th and on my online class, as well as my book in depth.
And we'll talk about those resources in a moment. But reading your book, two of the most helpful chapters for me personally was chapter 1 and chapter 8. And I'll talk about chapter 1 in a moment. But in chapter 8, you talk about this phrase, which I've shared with Erica, and we've talked about this. And I love this phrase. You talk about the importance of natural and logical consequences. Natural and logical consequences. I found that whole section invaluable. So talk to us a little bit about what these natural and logical consequences are, and how do you go about implementing them?
No matter what choice we make in life, we have consequences, right? It's important that we allow our children to feel those consequences themselves, which is countercultural today. A lot of parents want to protect their kids from feeling any consequences. But when we do that, we actually make the child feel incapable of handling things on their own, which actually makes them more anxious and depressed. So by allowing those natural consequences to occur and logical consequences, we are actually empowering our children. A natural consequence is just allowing something naturally to occur. It's just the parent not stepping in. For example, my kids are on swim team, and if they forget their goggles, they're going to have to dig in that lost and found bin and find a different pair or borrow one from a friend or go without. Please do not go home and get something that's forgotten, or use the vending machine they now have at the pool to get new ones. Just allow the natural consequence to occur. And furthermore, have your children pack their school bags and their equipment bags and their sports bags themselves. If you pack that for them, when those goggles are forgotten, they're going to blame you and they're not going to take responsibility themselves. So by allowing our children to do that, they are learning their own responsibility, and also have them carry their own stuff. As a matter of fact, this is such a problem. More than half of the people I see, the parents are carrying their swim bags for their kids, and the coaches have this, it comes out in emails, let your kids carry their own swim bags. It is so prevalent in today's culture. Also, just to note that successful people are not lucky. Successful people persevered despite challenges. So we really, really need to help our children, let them overcome their challenges instead of protecting them.
You actually, in this chapter, you talk about how these consequences are so important to help our children learn and grow. And then,
Oh, I forgot about the logical consequences. The logical consequence is where a parent actually creates some consequence that is logically related to something that happened. For example, if somebody spills something, just allow your children, just teach them how to clean it up. Instead of getting angry, it just needs to get cleaned up. So teach them how to do that, and truly, over the years, my kids, they spill and they clean it up. Sometimes not real well, but they do clean it up. But just really be on that mode that what are we going to do to solve the situation? How can they remedy the situation?
and that's another great example of reacting versus responding.
Exactly.
You know, we can react and get angry, how could you do this? And, you know, get
Yeah.
all flustered, or respond and say, okay, this happened, this happens, and what
Yeah.
are we going to do about this?
Exactly.
So the learning and growing part, another chapter that you devote on this whole topic about learning and growing, you talk about the importance of serving as a way to learn and grow. So why is serving so important for our children?
It's actually the antidote to self-centeredness. It takes the focus off yourself and onto others. It actually increases happiness, increases emotional and physical well-being and gratitude. Teens who serve get better grades. They have an increased self-esteem and decreased drug use. Even teens who are forced to serve. Jenny, it's true. Studies support all this stuff. Jenny Burke did just a fabulous job last week talking about how they had read a book and how it impacted those students in her class. I want to challenge you that you don't have to just get lucky enough to get Jenny for that class. You actually can take responsibility and teach your kids yourself. Read books that are impactful, that open the world to your kids, that other kids don't have it like you do. We read a book called A Long Walk to Water, which is a true story about a boy who was 11 years old in 1985 in South Sudan when the war came through his village and he got separated from his family. And he spent the next many, many years away from anybody and ended up in the U.S. and now builds wells in South Sudan to give back. It's a brutal story, very impactful, and there's so many books out there like that. Other things you can do as a family, sponsor a kid. We sponsor kids through Compassion and have for the last 10 years. And just writing letters back and forth and learning that this little boy in Indonesia, his light source in his house is a 2-liter bottle filled with water. And that provides, if you have it in the roof, it provides about enough light as a 60-watt light bulb during the daytime. But just that awareness over time. And how do you treat homeless people? How do you treat your neighbor? Just how you act in everyday life goes a long ways. So just having that attitude of serving, it doesn't have to be the once-a-year mission trip. It can be your daily life. That can be very impactful.
And so much good stuff just in that last question. All right, coming to the last question now. If you could have us walk away with a few things from your book, few insights, what would they be?
Parenting is really hard and imperfect. And a lot of people look to me like I somehow have it all together. And the truth is I came to parenting really broken. I had a lot of hurts from my childhood, and we have since I have mended my relationship with my father. But I really wanted to figure this out because I didn't want my kids to be fearful. I didn't want them to feel worthless. And I really made it my life mission to figure this out. And anybody who knows my family knows we are far from perfect. But it's okay to be imperfect. Embrace it. Embrace challenges as learning opportunities. Love your kids unconditionally and just believe in them. Encourage their effort, not results. Small steps in a different direction will lead you to a completely different place. Don't discount little things that you do, little tweaks of pausing before you respond. Just little things will make a huge difference in long term. And I want you to know that you are just the right person to be parenting and guiding that child who's
Amen.
in your life. And you can do this.
Amen. Amen. Hey, next steps. We are making Linda's book available in the lobby, so make sure you stop by and get a copy for yourself, and also maybe pick up one for a friend. One of the best books I've read on parenting. Also, Children's Ministries is sponsoring this half-day seminar coming up on parenting sensibly, and we only had a limited amount of time, so we just touched on some highlights. In this seminar, we're going to go deep, and there's only so many spots available, and so you want to make sure that you register for that. Also, the Marriage Resource Center in Frederick, they are organizing the full seminar, which is over 8 weeks, I think.
It's 8 weeks
Online course. And usually they do this for a couple of $100 or so, but for the first 25 people, it's only $25 a piece. So you might want to check that out. And information about that is in your bulletin. So thank you so much for joining us. Can we just thank Linda for a moment here? She was so nervous, and she said, I just feel so nervous being in front of people, but she did such a fabulous job, didn't she? Yeah, thank you so much.